I signed the closing papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The pen felt heavier than the house ever did. "Congratulations," the buyer smiled, not knowing the cost of it. Our mother's home wasn't mine to sell alone, but I told myself I was saving us both. My brother was oceans away, unreachable, always late for grief. I left him a message that said, "We'll talk soon." I didn't say I sold everything while you were gone. The escrow email pinged and my stomach twisted tight. Numbers marched across the screen like soldiers I couldn't command. I closed the laptop and pretended the house closed with it. For a moment I imagined my mother forgiving me, then the keys in my pocket burned like a warning. I walked through empty rooms that still echoed our childhood arguments. The hallway remembered our races, the kitchen remembered our hunger. I touched the dent in the banister Sam made at 16. "I'll fix it," he promised Mom, then left 2 years later. A text from my colleague flashed, "Congrats on another quiet win." Quiet was the point. Sam would call it sneaky. I told myself secrecy was mercy, not betrayal. The clock in the living room had stopped months ago. I never wound it, afraid of waking up old ghosts. I rehearsed explanations that sounded almost noble. Debts, taxes, maintenance, you don't understand, I planned to say. But the truth was, greed tugged at my sleeve too. I folded childhood photos into a box and avoided my reflection. He came back on a Tuesday, suitcase scuffed and eyes tired. My phone lit up with his name while I was driving. I pulled over and stared at the screen like a stranger. "Nora," he said, voice rough, "I'm at the house. Where are you?" The silence felt like the end of a long lie. "Don't go inside yet," I heard myself say, then winced. The buyer's workers were measuring rooms. They looked through him. "What's happening?" he asked, every word an accusation. I drove faster and wished the road could erase time. When I arrived, Sam stood on the porch like a ghost. He held Mother's spare key in his fist, knuckles white. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like," he whispered. I told him the truth and watched him swallow his breath. We sat on the curb because sitting felt safer than standing. He stared at the sold sign as if it could blink. "You sold our home?" he said, measuring each word carefully. "I sold it to save us from drowning," I replied. "You sold it without me," he corrected, voice shaking with restraint. I tried to explain the bills, the roof, the taxes. He listened like a prosecutor, not a brother. "I could have helped," he said, anger flickering into hurt. "From where?" I snapped, then bit back the childish bitterness. He glanced at the workers again, shoulders folding inward slightly. "You used your license and left me with a receipt." I said, "I'll split everything. I won't cheat you." He looked at me like I'd already done worse than cheating. That night, I dreamed our mother was folding sheets again. She measured corners like she could control every future crease. "Do what's right," she whispered, pressing a pillow to my chest. I woke with the smell of starch and grief in the room. After the funeral, the will named us both equally. That equality never felt equal when I paid every bill. Sam mailed condolences from a different time zone, then disappeared. I told myself I stayed because someone had to stay. The house became a patient and I was the nurse. I learned to talk in terms of comps and appraisals. Our childhood became a spreadsheet I edited for mercy. But mercy is elastic when you hold the calculator. I started to believe I deserved more than my half. The next morning, Sam arrived with a folder he didn't recognize. He handed me copies he'd pulled from the county records. "Below market by 20%, he said, eye circles dark. "That neighborhood is shifting," I answered, too quickly, too smooth. He pointed to the buyer's name and lifted an eyebrow. "Your client, your friend, your pipeline," he said, voice flat. I felt my stomach corkscrew and wished the floor would tilt. "It was the only clean offer," I muttered without conviction. "And your commission?" he asked, like he already knew everything. I measured the space between honesty and survival with my breath. "Standard," I said, and watched his face learn a new truth. He closed the folder like closing a door on my defense. "You didn't just sell the house," he said. "You sold me." I met the buyer in a coffee shop with bright tiles. She smiled like a friend and avoided the word bargain. "We followed procedure," she said, stirring sugar without tasting it. "Procedure isn't comfort," I said, feeling the words cut. She reached for my hand and thought better of it. "Your brother looked hurt," she added, eyes soft, sympathy shallow. I nodded and pretended that mattered more than it did. After, I drove to the house for a final sweep. It smelled of dust, lemon cleaner, and forgotten birthdays. I sat on the floor where our couch used to sit. I'm sorry, I told the walls. I needed out. The clock still refused my time, stubborn and silent. I took the keys and knew they weren't mine anymore. Sam moved his suitcase into a cheap motel near the freeway. He texted, "Meet me with the paperwork. Bring everything." At the diner, he had notes, timelines, and underlined questions. "You sidelined me for your convenience," he said, no theatrics. I slid bank statements across the table like apologies. "Take 60%, I offered, desperate to stop our bleeding. "I don't want hush money," he replied, voice steady, eyes rimmed red. He wanted accountability, a word heavier than any mortgage. "Sue me then," I said, already imagining the headlines. He flinched, like I'd slapped both of us. "You use grief like a ladder," he whispered to the window. I wanted to argue, but the words dried in my throat. The check sat between us, painfully bright and absolutely useless. I finally told him about the second mortgage nobody knew. Dad's gambling had crawled out of storage like a snake. The bank letters came at night, demanding absolute, unforgiving. I paid it off to keep our name from collapsing. "You could have told me," Sam said, surprised into silence. "You were gone," I said, then heard the echo of blame. He traced the numbers with his thumb, doing fast math. "This still doesn't explain the rest," he said quietly. I watched the truth gather like rain at the edge. "I kept more," I admitted, shame like sand in my mouth. "For me?" I said, so small I barely heard it. He leaned back, hurt hardening into something colder than anger. "You didn't just save us," he said. "You rewarded yourself." We met at the cemetery because we needed witnesses. The grass was uneven and our mother's name looked patient. "Why did you really leave?" I asked, not hiding the edge. "I was drowning in expectations I couldn't afford," he said. "I sent money when I could," he added, eyes lowered. "You sent postcards," I replied, and hated how small that sounded. He looked at the stone and exhaled like giving permission. "I couldn't breathe here," he said. "You could, you did." I wanted to tell him staying didn't mean I wasn't suffocating. "I envied you," I confessed. "Freedom looked like love from far." He nodded slowly. "I envied your importance," he said, almost smiling. We stood there measuring envy's damage like we measured debts. "We can't fix the past," he said, "but we can own it." I drafted a letter to rescind, knowing it wouldn't stand. My hand shook, but my guilt finally moved with purpose. The buyer refused, firm and businesslike, eyes not unkind. I thought of calling the inspector to find reasons. Sam stopped me at the door, voice calm, spine rigid. "Don't make another lie to fix this lie," he said. "I want to undo what I did," I argued helplessly. "Then start by telling the full story," he answered. We met the buyer and disclosed every buried detail. My voice cracked, and Sam filled in the parts I hid. The buyer listened, then chose the house with open eyes. We accepted penalties, fees, and a reputation that would scar. It wasn't redemption, but it was finally honest. Weeks later, the house glowed at dusk with a new family. A child's bike leaned where our broken mailbox used to sit. I left a note under the mat, "Take care of her." The keys felt lighter as I dropped them into the envelope. Sam stood beside me, no longer a prosecutor, just tired. We split what remained, uneven truths on a clean ledger. I moved into a small apartment with thin walls and sunlight. My phone stopped buzzing with whispers about my ethics. I started returning calls I'd been avoiding, voice softer now. Sam found work nearby and bought a cheap second-hand couch. We met for coffee, not negotiations, and spoke like siblings. The loss never left, but it started to fit our hands. Some homes are made of wood and some are made of honesty. After the dust settled, memories stopped hiding behind door frames. I remembered Dad stumbling in late, pockets clinking like cheap applause. Mum whispered with him in the kitchen, voice a frayed thread. Sam closed his bedroom door and turned music up louder. I sat on the stairs, counting breaths and years to come. Back then, I learned numbers could both save and punish. I learned to negotiate before I learned to drive a car. When the second mortgage appeared, it felt painfully familiar. The bank officer spoke gently, like grief had a customer service script. I said yes to everything because no felt like abandonment. Somewhere in that panic, my fairness eroded into entitlement. I told myself I earned more because I suffered more silently. That story hardened around me until it sounded like truth. One night, I wrote our mother a letter I'll never send. I sold your house, I wrote, and I broke your children. But I finally told the truth and it didn't kill us. I sealed the letter and slid it into my nightstand. The next morning, Sam knocked with coffee and hesitant courage. We should see the lawyer, he said. Close everything cleanly. In the office, we nodded through documents like tired actors. At the end, he touched my shoulder and didn't pull back. We can be better than this, he said, if we choose. I nodded because yes felt like air after a long dive. We walked out into ordinary sunlight, not absolved, but possible. I didn't get my mother's forgiveness, but I earned my own. And for the first time, home felt like a promise, not property.